That's right, a video game. I'll go through it all, what I loved, hated, and my general opinion based on playing Elden Ring for over 80 hours. First off, a bit of history for me in terms of video gaming. I mainly play first-person shooters. Apart from the Souls series, I've played them all apart from Demon Souls. The second thing is that I will address and move on with the performance issues. I had experienced issues with the PC version. It mainly just stuttered pretty badly for up to 15 seconds at a time, but as most of the video games I play are online, I'm used to major stuttering issues, especially when, for example, I play Apex Legends and you get the bug that makes your game feel like you're playing in a tub of glue. So basically, performance issues won't be included in my overall thoughts of this game. It's disappointing that these issues exist, but I'm just here to talk about the game itself. I will keep this review as spoiler free as possible. Some of the earlier game footage is on a new character that I made just for this video, and some of it is using my end game character that is in starting areas. The kickoff to this game is the same as most other Souls series. You get to spend an unreasonable amount of time creating an abomination by setting all the sliders to max and making sure you create a skin tone that just looks fabulous. The great news is that you can change how you look after you've made your character at any point in the game. Are you having an identity crisis? No problem. Find that your chin pokes out of your favourite helmet, just shrink it. Naturally, I created someone that was beautiful with a nice head of hair, someone that looks like a real hero, someone that I wish I could be. And naturally, I created another preset that makes me look like a tomato and one that looks like it's a nose poking out of a bush. Already it's game of the year for me, as I already spent several hours in this section exhaling sharply from my nose whenever I created something vaguely amusing. Once I finished these masterpieces, that's when I found out there is a totally different game outside of the character creation screen. The open world in Elden Ring is massive. It's huge. One of the best aspects of it is that it's filled with stuff to do. Not in the way that some others do it, where it's like, oh, I'm being attacked by some gang, or it's a wild animal that's come to beat me up, or anything like that. It's real interesting events, be it finding a battle against two strange creatures, a convoy, a religious ceremony taking place by some meteor impact, or just a group of the undead chilling by the sea. It feels like every area is different, filled with its own uniqueness and interesting biomes that contain various different enemies. Granted, some are repeated and featured several times, but those feel like a way to really flesh out barren areas instead of being really a haphazard copy and paste job. By far the most impressive thing was looking at the map. When you find the map of the area you're currently in, it's like everything on it is important. If there's something on that map that you can bet, you can go there and explore it. Points of interest are presented that way. If there's what looks like a small building, square, or anything on the map, just go there and take a look. You might be treated with an outpost filled with enemies, a cave that contains valuable crafting materials, or an on-field boss that exists to simply flex on you and send you back to the last site of grace you visited. And this also applies the same to the overworld as well. When you look around, you can see various points of interest and things that might be worth exploring. If you see a building poking out of a bush, it's worth probably going over there and take a look at it. If there's a peculiar tree just poking out, or a little bit of smoke, everything that you see and presented in front of you is pretty much key and worth exploring. I think it's a great way of encouraging people to explore without shoving it down their throat with waypoints. If that isn't enough, when you set it at a site of grace, it will direct you to multiple points of interest, albeit it's literally like someone going, take a look over there, and they've just pointed to Mount Everest. You know, it's still a bit vague. Even outside of the open world, there's just so much to do. You have various castles and main areas in each zone to explore. Some have vast castles and fortresses that you can spend hours in a time, which may contain the leader of the gym. Some have smaller ones that might take at least maybe half an hour. You explore it all and you get treated with a boss or a cool weapon that just makes you wish you put more skill points in faith. In some of the main castles and larger areas that can tie into the story, the freedom of exploration is very high. Thanks to From Software implementing their jumping technology that they discovered in Sekiro, you can make your way freely around the castle. Most of the time people will have their own way of exploring it. There were many times that I just ran around, saw a roof below me, jumped off and found out I could travel across the castle just by jumping on rooftops. Thinking that I was rewarded by using this incredible method of evading the aggressive inhabitants of the castle, I was then greeted with an eagle with knives on its feet and a flamethrower for a head. And there's at least 5 other areas like this. One castle has an underground area to it, so you explore the castle for a few hours, enjoying your time, then you find a ladder and slide down only to find that castle has another sprawling section that just eats up more of your time. As an example as well, this section here is something that I never saw previously, so there's still parts of areas that I missed. This is literally my high level character in one of the first major castles, so maybe around about 15 hours into the game. I just went here to record some footage and I found a new place because I got attacked by a dog. The game game is so vast that there's points when I eventually got a bit sick of looking at castles. I was maybe 60 hours into the game at this point and felt there was no end in sight. I get to an area that I thought was the end game and felt like I was approaching the end of my journey. Nope, wrong. Here's another section of the game for you to explore, and yes, it has a castle, and 3 caves, and 3 unfilled bosses. Oh, it also has a little warp point as well that takes you to another area, which also has a small castle and 3 small caves. Oh, and this one also has a warp point that takes you to another area, which leads to a small village, that then takes you to another huge castle. There are points where it's incredibly overwhelming. Luckily, you have your noble steed called Torrent to help you travel these vast distances. You can use this to take part in mounted combat, which is surprisingly actually pretty decent, and it can also be used to help with some bosses that like to move around everywhere. You also have the Sites of Grace where you rest and get your HP back, acting as fast travel points. These are plentiful, so luckily there's very few times where you feel the pain of having to travel somewhere all over again because you died to a man with a stick. One of the juicy parts for me in the FromSoft games have always been the bosses, and here they also impress. Some are disturbing, mind-blowing, and at points just confusing as you try to get to grips as to what exactly it is you're looking at. The pinnacle bosses or demigods are just incredible. Some of the fights are epic and are just absolutely nuts in terms of spectacle and difficulty. There's points that when I died I just sat there and just thought, damn son, chill out. There's no need for that. They're unfair, but oftentimes the bosses in these series are. But with my brute force playstyle where I repeat the same actions time after time, I too found myself having to use my brain. There was one boss where I was properly strategizing during it. I used 2 different weapons, one for the first phase and one for the second, and I loved it. I applied my big brain strategy and beat the boss. A good feature as well are these small waypoints before some bosses, meaning that you don't have to go all the way back to the grey site and can just re-enter the boss fight almost straight away. Something that is great to see as I still haven't recovered from some of the boss runs from Dark Souls 2. I do think though that this is maybe where the game deserves some criticism. I was fortunate enough to naturally have 2 weapons that I upgraded because I enjoyed them. One was a great sword, the Bloodhound's Fang, and one was a pair of claws. So one heavy hitter and one providing a lot of maneuverability, sort of like a death by 1,000 cuts kind of thing. But there are occasions and some bosses that move just incredibly fast. They'll do backflips, jump off walls, stretch their limbs, remove them, and all sorts of kinds of things during a fight. And you're just standing there rooted to the floor in a lot of cases, forced to just roll around the arena as the guy in front of you is flinging what feels like the global inventory of IKEA at you, which resulted in me being thankful that I liked a weapon that had a built-in dodge in its moveset, allowing me to duck in and out of combat and get some hits off. But there was a few occasions where I found that most of the time was spent running to get to the boss in the arena, as it had teleported to the other side, which was frustrating when you'd run over there, get a couple of hits off, then find it's doing another attack that requires it to spin in the sky for a bit where you can't hit it, and then teleports again to the other side of the arena, causing you to then run after it again. In Sekiro they had addressed an issue like this, being able to grapple towards the enemy that decided to create a large gap between you and it, but here you've just got another 10-second run back to the guy, and when it's happening multiple times a fight and you die, so you've got to do the whole thing again, it gets quite tiring. But combat and the approach you take towards most of the other bosses is really enjoyable. You get a sense of variety in approaching combat, and with the Ashes of War, which allow you to apply a special move set to an appropriate weapon, you can find a way to fight that suits you. As an example, I applied a move set to a flail that just meant I was swinging the thing like a madman as sort of an all-in final attack where I hope the boss pops some bleed build up before it gets another attack off and kills me. Or you can apply a dodge to it instead so you can swoop in and out and get your attacks off that way. Elden Ring is very difficult, and with the combat it really is about finding the weapons you're comfortable in. I'd recommend not putting everything into one weapon, as some of the bosses and enemies might not give you the time to get anything off more than a light attack. So if you're a bit stubborn like I am and you normally pick the biggest stick that you can find, you might want to branch out a bit. There are summons that help make the game a bit easier, which are basically ghosts that will help you during the boss fight and have varying qualities that will help you in battle. This ties in a bit of a strategy during combat, where some of them are maybe good for ranged combat whilst you tank, some others are the opposite and can be used as a distraction. I personally use a jellyfish. I don't know how much it did, if anything, but my goodness, that jellyfish took some hits, which was perfect for some bosses. Honestly, there's no shame in using these. If you know someone who gives you the whole get good or starts bragging about how they did it without summons or whatever, just remind them that nobody likes them. Another really cool thing that I enjoyed and a nice addition are the special flasks. Basically you can pick various buffs to apply to a one-time use flask, which could be taking less damage, regenerating health, restores some health, explodes when you drink and cause spells to not use up any mana and things like that. And I feel like this was actually really interesting because there were a lot of moments before bosses where I'd find myself changing these up, swapping one for maybe more damage on charged attacks, or making it so my HP regenerates over time, or I'd gain a buff of dexterity or something, and it just adds a nice new concept to it. In terms of story, I'll be honest, I'm going to wait for someone to make a 2-hour YouTube video to explain it to me. There are some moments of the story and world building, but like any other FromSoft game, the holes are filled with having to read flavoured text on items, or having to get an NPC to repeat what it said for it to make any sense to you. But from what I understand, basically, you're maidenless, you are tarnished, you need to become the Elden Lord. That's it. There are some good moments in the story where things get freaky and very intriguing, but I feel like for me personally, and like all other FromSoft games, I'm going to have to play it a few times before I can fully understand it to talk about it. I hit around 70 hours before I completed the game, and I still have optional bosses to complete. I'd personally maybe recommend not grinding this game because honestly there's so much content here that eventually you do get sick of it, especially when you have to kill another repeated minor boss again, and the music that goes with it will just end up making you cry. There were many points when I felt somewhat exhausted with all the content presented to me, and it got to a point where I completed an area, and after many hours I was then rewarded with unlocking a bigger area. And after having played the game for 8 hours straight, you do get hit with a big sense of despair. So overall I'd say that this game is honestly incredible. This is probably going to be a game that's going to be talked about for a long time. Similar to Breath of the Wild or Skyrim in terms of changing how people look at open world games, where the vast detail and enjoyment over the world just encourages you and makes you want to explore more and more. It feels like Lord of the Rings in some aspects, where you're on this incredible and epic journey throughout the whole game, constantly met up against a huge task to overcome that just increases in scale the further you go on. I think that regardless of how people receive it, I think there's no doubt that this game has also really set standards in terms of art direction. The game looks great despite it not having the best in class graphics. There's some areas that look incredible and make you feel like you're in a fantasy world come to life as you navigate through a massive city, a volcano, a desert filled with disease, or an underground area covered in blood. It's all beautifully constructed to make every area feel different in tone, to make you feel unwelcome, intimidated, or even make you feel like you're the big boy of the land. The music, colour schemes, geography, or the environment are all perfectly balanced with each other to make it feel just incredible. I'd highly recommend anyone to play this game. I would suggest taking it slow, exploring the areas that are presented to you in detail because you get rewarded for doing so. You might find something that helps make everything click in terms of gameplay that make it more enjoyable for you. I personally can't wait to play this game again, and I probably will do so multiple times using a variety of different builds and the like. To say that the game lived up to my expectations is wrong. It far exceeded them because I was never expecting a game that had this level of scale and detail. As someone that doesn't mind some fantasy content in terms of books, this really does feel like an incredible journey that is engrossing, and it really feels like your own adventure. That's all for this review. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments below. It is a bit of a long one, but I felt like this game was deserving of it considering I played it for 80 hours.